And we are live. Greetings, salutations, and welcome to another episode of the World Anvil Worldbuilding Podcast live. And I have, of course, a very special guest. Please welcome Alyssa Day to the Worldbuilding Podcast. How are you doing, Alyssa?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm doing great.
It is an absolute pleasure. And of course, we have a fascinating topic today. But before we get too far ahead, let me introduce my very fabulous guest, who is far too modest to introduce herself. Alyssa Day is an award-winning and New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of romantasy, paranormal romance, and mystery novels. Her books have won many awards, sold more than 1 million copies, and been translated into many, many languages, although she's holding out for Klingon. I can't wait. Most pertinent for today's topic, Alyssa has also lived with and battled chronic depression for her entire life and finally admitted it to her family and the world in 2014. She says, and I quote, "Life is better now because depression lies and tells us that we're alone, and we're not." Absolutely. And that really is the crux of today's stream, right, Alyssa? That's really what we're going to be talking about today on this podcast episode.
Great.
I'm really
I have to tell you, I was a little worried when my publisher gave me the invitation because I said, they're about gaming and I can't game. My son is an avid gamer and he tried to teach me once, and there was a castle and it had a lake around it and all the bad guys were in the castle and I just kept making my character swim away and swim away and swim away. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "But nobody's shooting me over here. Just keep swimming." So that was the end of my gaming adventure.
Absolutely. Well, of course, World Anvil is a world-building software, but it's also a novel-writing software as well as a campaign manager. So we really do the full gamut here. And some of these books behind me are gaming books, and some of these books behind me are prose books, and I have written both. So you're among friends. Gaming is welcome. Prose fiction and novels and short stories are welcome. Everything is welcome here as we sort of unpick this topic of mental health and fantasy, which I'm very, very excited to get into. Just before we do, I do have to ask, pugs, Alyssa, please. So I should give you guys some context. The final line of Alyssa's bio, which I had to keep, is when Alyssa's not traveling to new adventures, she lives in Florida with her Navy guy husband, spends time with her 2 amazing kids, and rescues dogs, especially pugs. And I just need to know, vis-a-vis mental health, pugs.
So many pugs. When my children were small, I'd had a rescue dog I got in law school to help me, get out of the house, because when my depression hits, it can be so bad that I can't get up off the couch or the floor or wherever I end up. And I knew if I had someone depending on me who had to go outside to go to the bathroom, that I had to get up to feed, then I would do that. I would be able to do that for this person, this creature who loved me and who depended on me. So I rescued this dog, loved this dog, had him all through, law school, practicing, getting married, having my children. But then, he was very old and passed on. And so I was looking around for what kind of dog would be great with small kids. And all my friends were like, pug, 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 pug. So I got my first pug, and pugs are like potato chips. You can't only have one. At one point I had 4 rescue pugs all at once.
That's a lot of pugs.
Snoring was horrible. The walls vibrate when 4 pugs are snoring. But they're just the most loving dogs. And then, we rescue other dogs too. I have a very elderly lab mix right now. And then I have a Chihuahua demon mix that the rescue sort of gaslit me about. But I loved him so much when I met him, and so I had to have him, and so he's just a little defective.
Oh, that's very beautiful. As the owner of a demon kitten, I sympathize. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Like, she's full of demons, and she's basically a goblin cat, but we love her, and that love goes both ways.
Because you have to, right? And aren't we all goblins sometimes?
Aren't we all goblins sometimes? Yes, absolutely we are. at least I am. Yeah, so I think that kind of segues quite nicely into our own demons as well, because, you mentioned, of course, that mental health struggles are something that you've been encountering. How does that affect your own writing process? Like, what are the things that you bump up against as you write all of these wonderful best-selling books? And do you have any particular tools or processes that have helped, or things that have like definitely not helped, for example, that have been suggested to you? Like, what has been your experience there?
So something I often say, and I even put it in, in my writing, is that everyone's experience with mental health is different. So
Yes.
this is mine. Mine is
Yes.
that I fall into a dark gray nothingness.
Mm.
And there are times when I can't write, I can't work, I can't even force myself to come into my office because there's nothing there at all. There are other times when I'm starting to fall. I can feel it. I can feel a bad period come on. And being able to escape into writing, into creating worlds, into other people's lives via the characters has helped to pull me out. So it's a little bit of some and it's a little bit of the other. I'm an avid reader, of course, because reading other people's books can help pull me out and can be a respite when times are really tough. And that's some of the most amazing email and comments I've ever gotten from readers, is that something I wrote helped them through a rough time. Because sometimes, especially when the world is a dumpster fire, which we've had a lot of lately, you need to be able to go somewhere where the good guys are going to win, and love will triumph, and you can make things right. And in writing, I can do that. So it gives me a little bit of control that I don't necessarily have when my brain has decided to be, I call it outside of normal. My brain decides to go outside of normal. And sometimes I can pull myself back in through the process of becoming someone else into my characters, which sounds a little bit, I know, Looney Tunes. I mean, I was 30, I think, before I realized other people didn't hear voices in their heads. It's a creative thing. I've talked to a lot of writers since who have the same. So coping mechanisms are often things you try and then stick with what works. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, and you try other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find that your writing do you find that your writing process changes if, like, depending on where your mental health is at?
Absolutely. It also changes on depending on what I'm writing.
Mm.
Um, if I'm writing, I have a mystery series that's very fun and quirky and lighthearted. So sometimes it's easier for me to dunk into writing that because there's going to be banter and there's funny paranormal creatures that show up in Dead End. And there's, it's a little town in Florida where all the misfit paranormal creatures live. And since I live in Florida, I know about crazy Florida. Yeah. Oh, the stories I could tell there. But
Oh man.
it's easier to drop into that world, and it's can be harder to drop into a more serious world or one where the themes are darker, depending on where I am mentally at the time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know from my own, uh, I am also somebody who's had mental health fun times, shall we say. And I know from myself, there are some days where I'm really struggling with mental health, and it's the writing that gets me through. It's having that routine
Mhm.
and knowing that whatever happens, however I feel, I drag myself to my desk and I sit down and immerse myself in this world for an hour, 2 hours, and then I get on with everything else that I have to do that is
Mhm.
stressing me out or upsetting me or making me question reality or whatever it is. And I know that other times I am not able to do that, and
Right.
therefore I have to really switch up my process. Essentially, the idea of sitting down for 2 hours and writing is repellent to me. It sounds impossible, and so I will sit on the sofa and write on my phone for 10 minutes, and that's already a victory. I don't know if this rings true for you at all. If there's sort of those kinds of differences.
There are there are times when a geographical change of location can help. Like you said, you sit on your phone or you write on your phone or on longhand on paper. Or there was one particularly difficult time where I could not even walk into my office for
Mhm.
almost 2 months because it was just such a pushback. And then the other thing is depression tells us not just that we're alone, but that we're worthless. So it's such an ugly vicious circle because it's, well, I can't write, so I'm useless. And because I'm useless, I can't write. And because I'm such a failure, if I write anything, it's going to be horrible anyway, and nobody's ever going to want to read it. And if they do read it, they're going to hate it. And just by touching my computer, the guy who invented the printing press is rolling over his grave at the horribleness of it all. And why don't I just give up? And, it's, my husband calls it, please stop the tragedy train at the station, because this is, in the midst of the worst time, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And it's such a vicious cycle. And we beat ourselves up so badly for something over which we don't have a lot of control. Nobody really understands how depression works. Doctors can't tell you exactly how it works. They'll say, well, it's brain chemistry. Well, it's lived experience. I think completely anecdotal based on my own life and what I've seen and heard from people. I think it's a combination. Medication can help. Sometimes the medication doesn't. You have to get a different one. Therapy can help. But basically what it boils down to is your brain is telling you you're not good enough, and you have to fight that voice. Some days it's easier than others. I try to ask myself, if my best friend, if Janet came to me and said, I can't write today, so I'm a worthless piece of crap, and I should just go sit in my closet for a week, because I would be so helpful and compassionate and supportive to you. But to myself, it's the evil, horrible self-talk, right? Because we expect so much more of ourselves than we do of anyone else. We're so much harder on ourselves than anyone else. It's like looking in the mirror and saying, does my butt look big in these jeans? You would never do that to your friend. So I try to treat myself with as much compassion as I would my friend. And some days it's easier than others.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I would say for myself and my own writing practice, having trusted other writers that I can send things to and be like, I think this is horrible. Please tell me what's wrong with it. And sometimes there is something wrong with it. Sometimes they will say, I love this, but where is your character work? And other times they will say, there is nothing wrong with this. Get out of your head and finish it. And then we can maybe talk about revisions. But right now, there's nothing wrong with it. It's great. It's funny. It's moving. You just need to finish it. Get out of your head and stop questioning it. And having trusted people who you can go to and say, help, I think I'm a terrible writer. And they could turn around to you and say, no, you're not. Here are the receipts. You know what you're doing. It makes all the difference in the world. That community aspect, that social aspect, that having trusted writers that that they know what they're doing, being able to tell you that you know what you're doing. Sometimes you need to hear that you know what you're doing, from somebody else.
That's absolutely true. And the writing community is so wonderful. And the writing friends you make at the beginning of your career are often the ones that stick with you for years and years and years, because they knew you before you won an award, or you hit the New York Times list, or you got a 6-figure deal or whatever. And they're the ones you can go to and say, wow, this is utter crap. And they'll be like, no, this is really great. You're just in a bad place. My agent also does that for me. I'll be like, oh, so, we could chop this out, but I think it's crap. And she'll call back like, oh my gosh, this is so great. So, but it has to be somebody you trust, because if you send it to someone who's more of a fan than a friend or critic, and they're like, this is wonderful, then it's easy enough for your depression brain to go, yeah, they're just being nice to me. Yeah. And why is it that we always believe the ugly stuff more than the nice stuff? Like 50 people, I don't read reviews. I haven't read reviews since the first year of my writing career, which is now on year 23. But why is it they can read 50 wonderful reviews, and then you read one that says, ugh, pacing was off, and you obsess about that? I mean, I don't know if people without mental health issues do that, but enough of my writer friends have said they do, that it's a good thing to avoid.
There is a guessed reason, a theorized reason why this happens psychologically, and it's because if we remember the bad stuff, then we are equipped to deal with the bad stuff from a evolutionary point of view. So if we encounter a dragon and it's bad, or we encounter a lion, more realistically, and it's bad, then we'll remember that thing more than we will remember where all the good berries are, right? So there is a reason why our brains do this, and it's terribly, terribly unhelpful.
Absolutely. And it goes back to the tragedy train idea, right? So I live in North
Yeah.
Florida. We have hurricanes all the time. We have really bad hurricane seasons where the power will
Wow,
go
yeah.
out, there'll be flooding, whatever. So we have it, and we're starting to get into that. So we have a generator. We have all these bins with hurricane supplies. And my husband starts labeling them hurricane supplies. And I'm like, no. And I label them in case of zombie apocalypse because, of course, I did. You know, it just, if you're prepared for the worst, it's one thing. But if your brain is always on guard, expecting the worst,
Yeah.
that's depression. You know,
Yeah.
it's going to be bad. There's nothing I can do about it. It's going to be horrible. I'm helpless in the face of that. That's depression. And that's when you need to say, no, wrong. There is something I can do. It's not necessarily going to be bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do just want to highlight another tool that you slipped in there, which is not reading reviews, protecting
Uh-huh.
yourself from stuff you know is going to be detrimental. And I
Yeah.
think that's a really, really good point as well here.
Well, plus I can't write by committee. And so I'll publish a book and I get lots of reader emails. So I'll publish a book and on the same day I'll get loved this book, too much sex. Love this book, not enough sex.
Yeah.
Love the book, the world building is terrible. Love the book, oh my God, the world building. And I'm just saying love the books. Of course, they're the ones like, oh wow, this wasn't nearly as good as your ex and such. You can't please everyone. You could never do that anyway. So if you try, you'll make yourself stop writing.
Yeah.
So you just have to be true to your own story in your brain, which sounds sort of esoteric and woo-woo, but that's what writing is. You know, I was a trial lawyer for 10 years and I told my husband one day, because he's like, you're so confident. Why are you not so much with the writing? And I said, because I went to law school and then I learned to be a trial lawyer. And every day I went to work and I was a lawyer and I did lawyer things. I wasn't going to wake up one day and forget how to do that. But being a writer, your whole job is you're making things up with your brain. That's your whole job. And what if one day my brain says, nope, don't feel like it. Don't want to do that ever again. Let's go work at McDonald's. So it's always there, right? It's always there that the whole thing could disappear because it's such a, what is it? What is writing? What is talent? What is creativity? It's the muse. It's the ether. It's your brain doing weird things. So I don't know. It feels fragile sometimes.
Yeah, that kind of ephemerality of it can be kind of terrifying. I don't know. For me, I think I'm a very technical writer. I'm a very methodological writer. So for me, that's what I hang on to in those situations. I'm like, wait, but we know what we're doing. You know, my writing teacher told me if we get to this point, we write a list of ideas, and then we look at the list of ideas, and then if we don't like any of them, we start bashing them together to see if we can make something that we do like. We have a plan. But again, that's a tool. That's a mental health struggle tool. When you panic and go, oh God, I don't know anything, you go, wait, no, I do. I have tools.
Yeah.
And sometimes just having a list of them somewhere for me has been very helpful. Or like, oh God, you know, writing to my friends and being like, oh God, how do I do this? And they'll come up with 10 ideas and I'll be like, yeah, you're right. Actually, I want to do it my own way, but they were all really good ideas. Sorry, go ahead, Alyssa.
But sometimes hearing other people's idea is the best thing because it tells you not so much what you don't want to do, but it springboards something in your brain like, no, I don't want to do that, but this.
Yeah.
I love to outline. My outlines rarely have anything to do with the book, but I like the process of it. And I have a whole, like, people ask, do you ever writing rituals? And for the longest time I said no, because I really didn't. I mean, I could write a Chuck E. Cheese on a Saturday birthday if I had to, because when my kids were little. But I realized I do have one, and it's I have a comfortable chair. I have to sit in with legal pads, white, never yellow, and longhand outline, usually with one or more pugs in my lap. And once when we moved a lot. My husband was in the Navy. I got rid of that chair or moved it somewhere else. And all of a sudden I couldn't outline anymore. And I didn't realize what was happening until I was like, well, that's my process. I sit in that chair, then I do my outline. Now, does the outline have anything to do with the book? Not usually, because it's fun to outline, and I'll get like a couple of chapters in, and then the characters will say, oh, no, we're not doing that. We're going to go here. But then it's fun for me, and it's almost like a brainstorming process to keep writing this mythological outline I'm never going to follow, because like your list of ideas, it's a list of directions the book might go, and then that leads me to directions the book actually wants to go. So it's sort of it's just another tool, it's another pull the story out and see where it's happening and see where it's going, and fool myself into thinking, yeah, maybe this or maybe that, or oh right, okay, this.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if this has been your experience, but I've dealt with mental health struggles for a very long time. And this is really one of the things we'll talk about later is silver linings. But one of the silver linings of that is that I have learned pretty well a lot of things. Like I've learned things that help, I've learned things that don't help, I've learned tendencies, and I've learned to spot things that can be, oh, this is a sign that things are about to go downhill, or this is a sign that things are pretty okay right now. And I can build up strategies from them. I don't know if that's something that you recognize from your own experience as well.
I recognize it not just from my experience, but from all the thousands of people who've talked to me about their mental health. When I finally sort of came out about having depression in 2014, I wrote a blog post about it. And I just had more than 1,000 people in a week reach out to me, writing messages, whatever, and say, thank you for talking about this. I've been so afraid to talk about this. And I was so afraid to talk about it, because I'm Superwoman. I couldn't have something wrong with me. But I found that so many of us are vigilant all the time, because they're always afraid, even on a good day, is it on the horizon? Is the darkness coming? But the silver lining that you mentioned is that we can appreciate normality and mundane aspects of living, I think, a little more than people who normal is normal. It's like waking up the day after a migraine and being in a euphoric state because your head is not pounding through the ceiling at you anymore. And that's what a day, days or weeks or whatever without depression are like. It's, wow, is this what the rest of the world feels like all the time? It's not a struggle to go force myself to have a shower and get to work. It's not a struggle to get up and feed the dogs. It's just, look at me, I can dance. And the other side of it, I think, and a less flippant way, is I've always been very type A. Yeah. And I had kind of a rough childhood, so I was always very closed off. And, I went through some stuff. And so I was very, very defensive, very closed off, very self-protective. And I think having depression and having to cope with it has let me see vulnerability in myself and allow it to come through in my writing, to have more empathy and compassion for what other people are going through, because I understand, I can relate. That shows up in writing, of course, but it also shows up in your life and just in being a good human being, if that makes sense. It's just being human, I guess, and not being able to come from a place of vulnerability that I don't think I would have been able to if I hadn't suffered through what I've suffered with depression.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and that's that's really wonderful. I think so. I started therapy a while ago, and one of the things that I noticed, apart from it really helping me, was that it's really helped me with my character work.
Really?
Damn, I write way better characters now because I understand people better, because I understand myself better. And that was a really interesting process. And I think that, as you said, being more empathetic, and also understanding myself better, it's really shown up in my writing. Like, I am much, much better at this part of writing that before I really struggled with. And that was such an interesting thing to realize, that, like, obviously, apart from all of the major life benefits, there is this wonderful thing where, like, my fiction is now better. I don't know if
that.
Yeah, it was a shock to kind of clock it, but I was like, oh wow. And reading a draft of a book that I wrote in 23 and then working again on it now because my agent asked me to pick it up and cut it down a lot. Um, I was really shocked to be like, oh, I can now see why this is terrible. And I put it aside because I knew something was wrong with it. I didn't know what. And I picked it up and I was like, oh, look, there is no character work. I can fix that now. And, part of that is being a better writer, but part of that is being a better human being. Like I've developed a lot. And that was a wonderful experience. I don't know if you've ever had anything similar, but for me it was a real eye opener.
I love that. And I teach a lot of workshops and classes for aspiring authors. And one of the things I like to tell them is your secondary characters have to be three-dimensional human beings, because so often you'll read, definitely in aspiring authors' draft work, but even in some published work, the secondary characters are sort of like the cardboard cutout trotted in for X reason for a scene or X reason for a motivation for the hero or heroine or protagonist, and then trotted out again. And specifically, back in the days of chick lit, like the Bridget Jones Diary, everybody had the gay best friend. And there was nothing. That was it. It was the flat cardboard cutout. And I think being able to understand vulnerability, being able to have more empathy and understanding and compassion, like you said, helps you to make all of your characters three-dimensional, and especially your antagonists. Because I'm not going to say nobody, obviously they're evil serial killer types, whatever, but for the most part, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, hey, I'm going to be an evil villain today. They have their own goals and motivations and pain or hurt or trauma that cause them to be who they are. And being able to understand all of that and come at it from a place of, if not complete empathy, at least compassion, makes that character so much more real, so much more poignant, so much more understandable to yourself and to the reader, right?
Absolutely. I think that's such a good point. And actually that segues us beautifully into my next question, which is essentially, there are a lot of writers who use mental health as a character flaw, depression, PTSD, and they're often very misunderstood. So if somebody is creating a character with mental health representation, what do you think are some of these sort of common problems that we see a lot, that people replicate without meaning to, that they sort of perpetrate through sort of superficial medium?
Well, I think the biggest problem with mental health representation in fantasy is that there's not enough of it. I have loved fantasy since I was a kid. I've been reading it since I was a kid, and I never saw anybody like me. I just didn't. I didn't see, we didn't. If somebody had depression, it was, because carrying the one ring dragged them down, and so there was that. And if you did see someone like us, it was the comic relief or the burden on everyone else, or the
Eeyore,
right? The evil queen, or in one example, and I love this author and I love the books, and even though I love the movies, but in the Hunger Games, the way the mother had depression, and so she was just depicted as such a horrible failure, and I think there wasn't enough compassion there for what she had gone through and what she was suffering. So that's sort of a shorthand for me for when I see that kind of representation without understanding, or here's going to be the one we have to carry along because she's going to be such a burden. Or why can't you just get over it? You're sad, get over it. Which, of course, are things I've heard all my life in real life. I think if you want to write a character who has mental health issues and you don't, then just like anything else you want to write that you don't, do your research. I wouldn't write, I have written doctors. I have done research on being a doctor. I have written, the lawyer, I was a lawyer. But, anything you write that you're not appropriating someone else's culture, obviously. But do your research. Talk to people. There's plenty to read. And you can find it everywhere. But talk to people. There is almost absolutely 100% someone in your family or close friend groups who is suffering with stuff like this. And if they are willing to talk to you, not only will you become a better friend to them, you will become a better writer of characters like this, because it's just like anything else. You can't fudge it. I had to put a note in my author's foreword specifically saying, I do not want, because my protagonist, we'll talk about that later, but my protagonist in Nobody's Quest has depression. That was the whole point. But I put a note in the foreword that said, I do not want her to appear ableist.
Mm.
Because sometimes, with my depression, I can't come out of it within a week, or, the worst was a couple of months. But for the scope of this fictional novel, I couldn't have a character who was incapacitated for 2 months.
Yeah.
So I had to, but I wanted to put that in. I demanded to put that in the foreword, because in the author's note, because I don't want anybody ever to read a book of mine and be like, well, she came up out of her depression in 3 days. What kind of failure am I that, I'm still on the couch a week later? So never, the most important point I think is never have a character with mental health representation in your book that makes the rest of us feel bad about what we're going through. That's why I said, before I signed with the publisher, I said, this character will never be healed by magic. She will have to live with this and deal with this her whole life. There'll be no magic wand, sparkly fairy dust. This is her. This is part of her life. And I think too often when you do see anybody with even a hint of some sort of, then they're going to be solved by magic. And it's a disservice to those of us with mental health issues to see that.
Yeah, I agree. And it's a common issue with all kinds of, struggles and issues and mental health issues and also disabilities, that it's sometimes tempting for people to turn this either into a character flaw that needs to be fixed, or into a kind of, fatal flaw that keeps, downing them in the plot in a very plot convenient way. And again,
or the after school special of the week where the whole book is just about this person having that issue. I mean, my book is a fantasy, it's romantasy, it's spicy, there's sword fights and a protagonist with depression, not oh, this person has depression, that's her entire personality. It's not for any of us, right? It's not our personality. It's one thing about us as a whole, and that
yeah, absolutely. No, and it can be infuriating. I think another one is when it's portrayed as sexy. Does that make sense? Like Byronic heroes and their depression then becomes part of their brooding mystery, but actually they have genuine depression and they are not okay. And everybody's swooning over them because they're so mysterious and this and that. I'm like, no, this man is not fine. Could we stop romanticizing this, please? I think that for me is a big old common problem with mental health representation.
I know, like the Phantom of the Opera, if only there'd been a good plastic surgeon back then.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it's it's something that you see with a lot of these kinds of things, but the kind of romanticization of it instead of just accepting that this actually is a problem that somebody is living with. Yeah, it's a big old issue for me, I think.
But it's getting better. It's getting so much better. And New York, for the longest time, would not take a chance on a protagonist with mental health issues, right? But then indie publishing came along, and indie authors are magnificent. And they can go places that New York was not letting anybody go. So there are authors who deal with chronic health issues, chronic mental health issues in beautiful and tasteful and inclusive ways, because it's things they've gone through themselves. And so I love the fact that we have indie publishing now, and because people have more freedom to go places. And so many indie authors have done beautiful jobs with mental health representation in books. Yeah. I need to put together a list because people are always asking me this, and I have a whole list of authors that I've read and loved, and on my brain when I'm in a podcast. So I need to put together a list I can read from and tell you. But a quick online search will show you, and it's just it's so refreshing, and it's been better and better and better. The more we talk about it, the more we do this, the more it will be better next time.
No, and I think that's such a good point that we do need to keep talking about it. And absolutely, indie publishing has really relaxed the chokehold of trad on what people think is acceptable to put in a book and what people think is like sensible and people will buy, because it's really proven that readers have a lot wider taste than trad pub gives them credit for. And readers actually want much more interesting things often than trad pub gives them credit for. So yeah, no, absolutely hard agree on that one. I think this is maybe a good place to go next, because often people think, okay, depression is depression, mental health is mental health. But of course, age and gender can make a real difference in the way that people act with regard to that. World building can make a real difference in the way that people are, people think about this, people talk about this, the way that people are socialized, which of course, again, is culture, it's world building. What's your thought on this, the portrayal of, across ages, across genders?
That's an interesting question. I think if you look at our own world and cultures, you've seen that different cultures treat mental health in very different ways, and specifically for men versus women, right? Mm-hmm. So there are so many cultures where being a man is this macho culture, this alpha male culture, to the point of they can never admit any flaw or any mental health problems or anything that wasn't, strength in every way. I know growing up when I was a teenager and all this started showing up first, my parents didn't believe any of it, wanted nothing to do with it, told me I was exaggerating, it was ridiculous, I need to get over myself, that sort of thing. And what was odd was that I kind of expected it from my dad, but I felt more betrayed from my mom, because I think even then I had, we had this cultural dichotomy where women are supposed to be the more nurturing and compassionate, and men are supposed to be the more stoic and strong, and nothing gets to them. So when I'm building worlds, I like to make sure that I'm taking that into account, and I'm not automatically defaulting to cultural norms that I grew up with, right? And I think sometimes the woman, the older woman, as you asked me about age, I think sometimes the older women in fantasy who have mental health problems are, the old witch or the crone, and all the children are afraid of them, and maybe she just had anxiety and didn't want to come out of her little wooden house. Maybe the stupid children kept trying to eat her house. The underlying, when you study the underlying assumptions behind the premise, then oftentimes it falls apart like a house of cards. And it's been interesting with the Odyssey coming out, because I started reading the translation of the Odyssey by the female scholar who went back to the source material.
Emily Wilson, I believe, yeah.
Yes. And it's so different because she's not, there are so many things that were just assumptions and gender-based assumptions, or will be easier on the men. And it wasn't really slaves they had. It was just servants. And it wasn't, and so it's interesting to compare cultural assumptions throughout history as well. I mean, I love history. I love archaeology. I love mythology, all of this stuff. So I could go on and bore people to death with it. But it's an interesting check to make when you're going through your own story, to check your own cultural assumptions and be like, well, why did I do that? I grew up all over the world. So I lived in Turkey for 2 years. I lived in the Philippines for 2 years. So I didn't automatically have that thing where my default character was a white character. And then you only describe what color skin someone has if it's not white. Yeah. I didn't automatically have that because I had not grown up solely, in the Midwest or whatever. But it's one of those types of assumptions you need to make, or you need to check in your own writing. Like, oh, well, why is the woman the crone? And women in fantasy, right? We're only just now, well, not just now, but it's been a recent thing that we're getting our real moment. For so long, the women in fantasy were only the evil queen or bar wench number 3.
They were
And
exactly what you said about side characters. They were exactly that. They were a fulcrum for the plot, and that was it. Yes.
exactly, usually with large bosoms.
Yes.
So I was like my son was playing this game one time, and I'm like, how could she stand up?
Yes.
How would physics work? Would she fall over? And why a bikini? Where's the armor? The guy's got the armor. What if somebody stabs her in the belly? He's like, Mom, it's not real. I said, I know it's not real, but the assumption's there. So we need to check our own to not perpetuate this, right?
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely correct. And so, tiny aside, my mom is an expert in gender and material culture of Bronze Age Greece. So we've talked at length about the Odyssey and the portrayal and Emily Wilson's translation and everything else. And there are some massive problems there because, for years men have been, translating this thing in a way that they didn't actually quite understand, or making an assumption based on older translations because it's just sort of ingrained. And one of the things that Emily Wilson did very well in the translation is, to your point, question these assumptions. And there's a lot of gendered stuff in there that wasn't spotted. Like a lot of the stuff around the dog is very gendered because the dog was the animal of Odysseus, but also because it was an outside animal, and because it was a hunting animal, and because it was a male animal, not a female animal. And like a lot of the way that works is also deeply gendered in a way that really wasn't picked up on for a very long time.
That's so interesting. I never would have thought of that. All I was doing was just like crying because this poor dog. Did you see the movie yet?
Yes, it was brutal.
Poor dog out there lying on the. Oh my! I would have killed somebody for that alone.
Yeah. Pugs got extra treats that night. That's what I'm sensing here.
It was awful. It was so sad. But that's interesting. Oh, the dog. I'll have to think about that.
But yeah, there's an awful lot in the Odyssey that is sort of deeply interesting like this. I did want to ask this question. I guess it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek and a little bit not. Essentially, there are a lot of tropes in fantasy that have a lot of mental burden. Like the Chosen One. That it feels like that is a trope that is gonna give somebody some mental health struggles. Another one is like, why are magic girls? Why do they not all have narcissistic personality disorder? Or do they all have narcissistic personality disorder? Or what's going on with this? Now, obviously, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but are there any fantasy tropes where you're like, that one, this mental health aspect is not explored enough?
Yeah, I think the Chosen One, as you said, is a big one. That's why in my book, it was definitely an anti-Chosen One. I wanted someone who was completely ordinary in every way, and that's why she did the thing, not because she was the chosen one. Can you imagine the pressure that puts on you? Back before, and this is not about mental health, but remember all the books where the women only had power if they were virgins? I mean, come on. Really? There's just, I don't know. And that gets back to the gendered stuff too. I don't know. Chosen One for me is the big one.
Yeah, that one is super problematic. I think inherited magic, that kind of stuff is also something that would have an awful lot of stress. And honestly, the mental implications of magic in general, particularly magic that you can't necessarily control very well. Like I would, in Dungeons and Dragons, there are several different kinds of magic users, right? There is the learned one, the wizard, the mage, who learns from books and everything's very intentional. But then there's also the sorcerer, and they are kind of manifestations of magic. They manifest magic. Magic comes from them in a way that is not entirely controllable. I would be terrified. I would have incredible anxiety that I would like accidentally set my own bed on fire or like shake hands with somebody and electrocute them. Can you even imagine that?
I know, that's so funny. And I think another one is the frustration of being left behind. I'm playing around with this story. I probably shouldn't even tell you about it, but I'm playing around with this story where the heroes, the band of adventurers, are people who are the professors at a magic academy. And they're just so tired of sending these ignorant 18-year-olds out to screw up when they're supposed to be saving the world. And they're like, not again, Kevin.
I love this
Why?
so much.
We know enough to teach them. Why are we letting them do it? Because the frustration of being a 40-plus-year-old female character in fantasy, which relegates you to being nothing. Other than the old crone or the magical teacher who has to teach somebody else to do the thing.
Oh, the mentor who dies. Can we just? Like, you are doomed to be the mentor who dies. Yeah.
Right. That's your whole thing. Can you imagine the frustration? I mean, I just imagine this support group of fantasy female characters 40 plus who are like, no, we've had enough of this.
Yeah. If I have to talk another chosen one through their destiny, I'm going to eat my witch's hat. I love this so much. Alyssa, I have a personal request. Please write this. It sounds incredible. I want to read it.
I definitely will. It's my insomnia book. I've been playing with it on nights I have insomnia. So.
Oh my goodness. It sounds incredible. Are you familiar with Diana Wynne Jones's Adventurer's Guide to Fantasyland?
No, I haven't read that.
It is a satirical travel guide by Diana Wynne Jones.
And of course, she's amazing.
About all of the fantasy tropes and what Fantasyland would really be like. And for example, one of the things is you never see any animals except horses and humans. And yet at every tavern you go to, there is meat stew. So what's stew? And it's full of stuff like this. Absolutely hilarious. I do feel like it would be a really good reference for that book because it really goes through the tropes in a very fun way.
That's funny. I'm totally getting that.
I just recommend it in general. I found it in a secondhand shop years ago. I didn't know what gold I'd found. And since then, I've just, recommending it to everyone. Such a good book.
Love that.
Amazing. I think that kind of takes us to Nobody's Quest, because I have to say, we've talked a lot about mental health. We talked a lot about the different facets of sort of where mental health fits within fantasy and where people have not quite considered it enough in fantasy. But I have to say, romantasy and mental health don't exactly feel like a fated match. So how did you integrate them into a novel? Like, how did that work?
Well, first, I had to sell it to a publisher. My agent was really, really, really excited about this book. She was calling me every day from her vacation in Hawaii. And she said, this is something, that we need to get out there. People are going to love this. I had... with the publisher I chose, Red Tower, which is just amazing. They're a Fourth Wing publisher. I had about a 2-hour phone call with Liz Pelletier, the publisher, and we talked about this stuff. And I said, listen, as I mentioned earlier, she is never going to be healed by magic. This is going to be her. It's just one part of her struggle. It's not a, movie of the week about a girl with depression. It's a spicy, exciting, epic quest fantasy, which is my favorite, the epic quest. It's Lord of the Rings meets Cinderella, but Cinderella happens to have mental health issues. And she was like, absolutely, we want to do this. The company is excited about it. Let's do it. So I just had this character pop. I would want to write someone with depression like I have for my whole career. But I had this character just pop into my brain fully formed, which happens a lot with me. And she was scrubbing the floors and the baseboards of shelves in the library. And a whole group of king's soldiers came for her with their swords out. And I was like, why? Why would they have their swords out? What could a servant in the library have done, that this level of response needed to happen? And it sort of just built from there. And it was, well, I want an epic quest, but I don't want the super powerful magic person, the unbelievable assassin, the girl who's been sword fighting since she was 3. I wanted somebody who was a nobody. And her world actually considers people with depression to be gray mimes, and they brand them. And they're basically sold into indentured servitude where other people can earn their way out. Someone with gray mime never will. So it's a lifetime of indentured servitude. And so she was a nobody, but there were other nobodies they were trying for this specific quest because the goddesses were fighting. And the only way to free the goddess of nature and balance was to release her from this prison, but all the oracles said nobody can defeat the goddess of war. And finally, a sorcerer said, what if we take that literally and we find a nobody? And so they had tried the pig keeper and a thief, and they had a whole lineup of nobodies, and Soli wound up being the one who could hold this amulet without catching on fire. Little risk. Try touching this amulet, you will burn to death right there on the spot.
Wow.
But I loved that, and she didn't have all this magic, but she had grown up in a library and taught herself to read and read everything. So she has all this knowledge that helps her in all these different situations. Like, oh, well, in this book, they said you can do this and this might help. And so she uses her brain and her knowledge from books, which as a writer, right? To work her way through these situations with found family, which is one of my favorite tropes in the world, a prince with no kingdom, a warrior with no sword, a sorcerer with no magic. And they come together and they've got to cross the continent and rescue this goddess. And then all the epic quest things that happen. The only one horse. So it's very romantic, and it's spicy, and it's funny because I have a lot of humor in my voice. And there's sword fights, and there are monsters and magic, but there's also a heroine who's got to work her way through all this, got to help try to save her world while battling her own mind.
Wow.
And that's the Nobody Chronicles. That's Nobody's Quest. And it's been amazingly, humbling. And I'm so grateful for all the readers who have reached out to me or posted TikToks or Reels or driven 9 hours to see me at a signing, which someone did last weekend, just to tell me, thank you for finally letting me see myself in a book, in a fantasy. Like, I love to read. Thank you. Thank you. And that means everything, because don't we all want that, to see ourselves in something that we love?
Yeah. That must be really meaningful to have that kind of outflow of response as well. Like so affirming for your own journey as well.
It really is. It has made me cry more than once, which, tough trial lawyer, my opposing counsel never would have believed it. But it's so, it just means a lot. It does. It means everything, because I wanted to see somebody like me in a book all those years growing up. And I think it would have helped, it's like in the book, Soli has this heroine of a series of children's books that she knows. And so she will go back to her like, well, Captain Wave Dancer could have done this. I can do this. And she has a mantra she says during really rough times that is, storms pass, pain ends, I will never quit.
Yeah. And
she gets the other people in her group to start saying that with her. And the thing is, people said, oh, where'd you get that? Where'd you come up with that? And it's like a mantra I've had all my life. Wow. Because they do pass, it does end. And if we give up today, then we won't be here for tomorrow, which might be beautiful and bright and glorious. And there's always tomorrow. There's always the next day. There's always the next chance, the next sunrise, the next non-gray period. And I loved being able to put that into epic quest fantasy, which is my favorite genre in the world. I just love it. I loved everything about it. And I'm so happy that people are receiving it and seeing themselves.
What was the experience like of writing this character? Did it ever feel too close to home?
Yes. Yes. There were times it was very, very hard because I was more honest and more vulnerable in this book than I've ever been in a book. I needed people to understand Soli and what she was going through. So it wasn't, oh, why is she being useless? Why is she falling apart here? Why can't she just suck it up and pull herself up by the bootstraps? And in order to do that, I had to be authentic to what it's really like to go through this. And that was very hard. There was more than one time that I wondered why I was doing it. I could have written and had written hundreds of other characters who didn't have these struggles. But then I kept thinking, but this is worth it.
Yeah.
I can keep going, and tomorrow will be better. Tomorrow will be less hard. The next scene is a little more fun. Not so serious.
Yeah. I know from my own writing practice that sometimes I will write something and it will catch me emotionally and I won't always know why immediately. Or I will be shocked at the emotional depth and connection I have to something that I didn't think was emotional. I wonder if you ever had that experience in this book where, you were writing something that felt more every day and then suddenly the resonance sort of hit you.
Absolutely. And that happens to me a lot too, because I think our subconscious sets down paths and subplots and meaning that we don't necessarily even recognize until we get further into the book. And then we're like, oh, that's why they did that. And that makes so much sense here. And then also things that are going to be sad sometimes hit you really, really, really hard. I had one time I was literally sobbing at my computer and my family rushed in, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I said, this happened and I can't, and they're like, oh, mom's writing again. But if it doesn't, well, I mean, there were hugs, they brought me cookies, but basically, after all these years of writing, they know me. But if it doesn't hit us in the emotions, then how can we expect our readers to resonate with it? If I'm writing something funny and I don't think it's funny, then why would they laugh? If it's painful or poignant or sad or heartbreaking and it doesn't make me cry or feel those emotions, then why would a reader feel it? And early on in my career, I was much more superficial with emotions. And it was similar to you before I got help and therapy and took a deeper look inside myself. And I had one review once in one of my very first novels who said, well, she'd had all these problems with her mom and then she solved it. They had a great conversation and made up, but you didn't show us the conversation. You just said, oh, we had this conversation. Everything's great now, la, la, la. Because I didn't want to dive into that emotion. It was too hard. It was too painful. That's something I would never do now. Now I go into the things that are the hardest because those have the most value.
Yeah. When I had started out publishing, I was really annoyed because I would write these things that I thought that were very good and they weren't getting picked up. And the things that were getting picked up were always the really personal things. And I would look at them and be like, objectively, I know that this is less good than the good thing, but that's what people are buying. That's what's getting picked up by the magazines. And it was exactly what you said, like really wading through those emotions. It's hard, it's uncomfortable, but if you can do it as a writer or you can do it as a game master or a creator, it really resonates in the work in a way that's actually impossible to replicate,
And especially in fantasy, because in fantasy, we're asking the reader to suspend disbelief.
Absolutely.
Suspend your disbelief that vampires exist, that these monsters exist, that this continent with these battles exist. But you can't ask them to suspend disbelief in the authenticity of the emotion, because that's where we all live, right? We may never fly a dragon or talk to a snow leopard or, have a sword fight to win territory back. But we do have heartbreak and love and striving and determination in the face of almost insurmountable odds. And so if the authenticity is in the emotion that you're portraying, then you give the reader the ability to say, sure, I will go with you anywhere. I will suspend disbelief about anything magical you tell me because the heart of your story is true.
Sure. It has that resonance. It feels real in the emotions, even if it doesn't feel real in the dragons.
Exactly.
So we have an excellent question here from Mikaro Chandra, who asks, what mental health condition do you feel gets handled most poorly by writers?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I've seen a lot get handled poorly. I think I've focused mostly on depression because it touches me so much, but also anxiety. Anxiety is a big one that gets treated as a plot device.
Yes.
Oh, somebody's going to have a convenient panic attack.
Right.
And I sort of cringed every time I see that, because mental health is not a plot device.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point. A character who handles anxiety, in my opinion, very well is T. Kingfisher, Ursula Vernon. In her sort of romantic fantasy series, really nice work. And a lot of her characters are very anxious, both with a little a and a big A. So you see it a lot, and I think she gets it really well. Is there any author that you think has handled that well?
Oh, you know, I have a lot. I think some characters that the people don't even realize they're writing someone who has anxiety, but you can see it. It's not anxiety capital A, but it's there underneath.
Yeah.
I was reading Jade Presley, and I've been on tour a lot lately, and so I was reading her Why Choose Romanticy, and her heroine has so many issues. Her sister disappeared, and she's trying to do this and she's trying to do that, and all these horrible things are trying to happen to her. But underneath it, she's trying to hold it all together. And again, I need to write a list together for these questions, because I have so many that I've read and appreciated, and I can never think of names.
Oh, yeah. It's hard to keep them all. There are many wonderful books in the world, and isn't that a great problem to have?
I know.
And finally, I think this is just a lovely question. What's the most rewarding feedback you've received from a reader who felt seen by your work?
Oh my gosh. There have been so many, just people saying, thank you, thank you. This finally made me feel seen. I had one reader who did a whole TikTok about how she loved the book so much, but she didn't feel like she could give it a star rating because it was so personal to her. And I just reached out and said, thank you for reading. There's no requirement to do whatever. And she reached back out to me personally and told me some of her background and why. I had someone come to me at a book signing, and she said this in front of other people, so it's not a confidence I'm betraying. She had driven many hours to get to my event here in Jacksonville, and she is a mental health professional who runs support groups. And one of her support groups is for people with depression. And, in my world, Solely and the other characters with Gray Mind have the GM branded on their skin, which is horrible. But she said she started a book club, and she had used my book. And so they were reading the first chapter or the first couple of chapters, and having a meeting. And after the meeting, as she usually does, she would go out to do some paperwork while they had a chance to chat without her there. And when they came out of the room, and this is giving me goosebumps just to say it. When they came out of the room, they had all taken a marker and written GM on their faces.
Wow.
And said it was the first time they felt seen in a book so well. And that meant everything to me. That was something that I wrote down on a little note. And on days when it's too hard, I think, but look, if you can touch somebody like that, then it's worth the struggle. It's worth the hardship. It's worth everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to echo something that you said at the beginning to close, which is, if we talk about this, it shows that we're not alone. And the more that we can talk about this, the more that we can destigmatize it, but the more that we can reach out to other people and help them understand that, this is something that many of us go through,
Absolutely. And for that reason, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today and to have this platform to talk about mental health and fantasy. I love it. I love that, our children's generation is going to have a lot less stigma. I love it that people are standing up and saying, we want to see ourselves and getting help. And I would just say, please, 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 you're not alone. If you're like me, you're not alone. Never think you're alone, and never think you're not good enough.
Yeah. I 100% echo that. Alyssa, thank you so much for coming and speaking so bravely and so honestly and so interestingly on this whole topic. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And folks in the audience live, the fun is not over because we are going on a raid. Our raid shout is Light Up the Forge. So please shout it as you go and join the Rookery. They are talking eldritch horror, YA fiction, thrillers, and more. It's going to be a great ride. So do stick around and check them out. And of course, you can find a stream on here every week if you are new. It is an absolute pleasure to have you all here. And thank you, everybody who asked questions. Folks, you know what to do. Grab your hammer and go world build. Bye.